信心百倍的打好这一场阻击战、总体战，打好这一场人民战争。
The epidemic struck without warning. A new war of resistance was suddenly on. The fight against the epidemic would prove to be grueling, one for which the entire nation needed to unite.
全面的、充分的发挥我们有党的领导的优势，集中力量办大事的制度优势，打人民战争的优势，我们一定能取得疫情防控斗争的全面胜利。
In the face of the crisis, the whole nation stood united.
N95个口罩了烧响的吧？
啊，来烧响的。
烧响里向是隔离
钢筋口罩。
N95个口罩。
No sooner had Shanghai's Ruijin Hospital received the urgent order to send a medical team to support Hubei than it began gathering supplies. On Chinese New Year's Eve, Chen De-chang, director of the critical care department, and Shen Hong, a nurse, both headed to the hospital.
那就这样吧，我会反正注意点吧。好的，好的，学你回去吧，没事的，好吧。
Chen De-chang's wife is also a doctor. She understood that for her husband, duty always comes first.
我跟他都是2级大毕业的，骨子里边还是有惊人的这种作风在，是吧？一旦祖国的召唤啊，一旦这个组织的召唤，那我们还是义无反顾的。
你要不要吃好了吧？嫂，侬到啥地方啦？要不要吃了吧？
Nurse Shen Hong had finished her shift less than 6 hours earlier, but she still rushed back to the hospital, 80 kilometers away from her home, arriving at 8 p.m. An experienced ICU nurse, familiar with respiratory illnesses, she believed she had a lot to offer Wuhan.
担心怕是怕，但是依然选择继续前行，这就是我们的责任。
辛苦你了啊！好。
The hospital had prepared dumplings so that Shen Hong could enjoy a traditional New Year's Eve dinner. After a hurried meal, she set off for the airport.
好。
没事，好好干啊！家里是后队，没问题。
A China Eastern Airlines plane had been chartered to take them to Shanghai. Within an hour, everything was ready for departure.
当前这场疫情对全国来讲，我们都有一个共同的责任和使命。今天我们136名医护人员来自于全市52个医院。上海人民，感谢你们，我们在上海等你们凯旋。
Later on New Year's Eve, 718 medical personnel from Shanghai, Guangdong, and the PLA arrived in Wuhan. The sudden surge in cases after the initial coronavirus outbreak left Wuhan desperately short of medical resources. Despite the best efforts of the local doctors, many patients couldn't receive the urgent treatment they needed. The pleas for help from sick people at hospital entrances and on the internet affected the whole nation. On January the 25th, the first day of the Lunar New Year, President Xi Jinping chaired a meeting of the Politburo Standing Committee. He called for an all-out effort to treat those infected, step up the dispatch of medical assistance to Wuhan, and coordinate civilian and military medical resources. On the same day, 5 more teams comprising 746 doctors and nurses from Hunan, Jiangsu, Shandong, Sichuan, and Zhejiang arrived in Wuhan. The medical team from Sichuan, when they arrived at Wuhan Red Cross Hospital, were shocked by what they found. The number of patients by far exceeded the hospital's capacity to handle them, and 57 members of staff had been infected.
这个病房里面加满了，到处走道上也是病人，病源和家属混在一起的，医生和病源也是混在一起的。如果不进行流程的改造，最后我们就变成个大染缸。
That night, the decision was taken to suspend admissions. They would focus their efforts on screening patients as quickly as possible, disposing of contaminated medical waste, and reorganizing the ICUs. 4 wards were converted for special use, and 5 safe corridors were established for patients, medical staff, administrative staff, cleaning staff, and contaminants.
我们来把阳性的病人一步一步挪上去，一层一层的倒腾。我们医护人员上去进出的这样的一个通道，要把它变成单循环、单进、单出，还有呢，要使清洁区彻底清洁。
Within 7 days, the hospital was transformed into a specialist infectious disease unit with significantly increased capacity. By the start of February, an all-out effort was underway to treat everyone infected with the coronavirus. On February the 3rd, at another Politburo Standing Committee meeting, President Xi ordered more medical staff from other parts of the country to be dispatched to Wuhan.
天师借重黄攻略啊，毛主席有这个诗词，是吧？现在就是靠你们在前线，扛住、顶住，我们也要看到，全中国现在有2万人，是吧？在这个驰援武汉、驰援湖北，将来不够，还可以继续加强。
In just 1 month, 346 medical teams from across China were deployed on the front line in Wuhan and Hubei. The largest contingents came from Jiangsu, Guangdong, Liaoning, Zhejiang, and Shandong provinces. Hainan, Henan, Shanxi, Ningxia, Jilin, and Gansu sent over 20% of their critical care specialists. Tianjin, Hebei, Anhui, Jiangxi, Shanxi, Yunnan, and Qinghai formed special multidisciplinary diagnosis and treatment teams. The PLA dispatched more than 4,000 medical personnel, many of them veterans of the battle against SARS and of missions to Africa to fight Ebola. China's leading medical schools, including Peking Union Medical College, Shangya Hospital Central South University, Qilu Hospital of Shandong University, and West China Hospital of Sichuan University, all did their utmost to support Wuhan and Hubei. The scenes were, at the same time, touching and reassuring. When reinforcements became needed later, many hospitals sent their entire ICU medical staff and all their equipment. This meant a single team could take over a whole hospital or ward area.
坚决贯彻党中央、国务院的决策和部署，科学的救治，精准的施策，所以能上的办法都上。
提高治愈率，降低死亡率，这就是我们的主要任务。所以就要从人员的调配、住院的硬件条件的改造、诊治水平的进一步提升上，等一下功夫抓细节，
发挥我们的人才优势、技术优势、学科优势，我们有信心、有能力，一定打赢这场阻击战。
By early February, the novel coronavirus epidemic was spreading to other parts of Hubei province, causing a rapid rise in the number of confirmed cases. In line with a decision by the party, 19 other provinces launched paired support projects aimed at providing direct assistance to 16 cities and prefectures in Hubei. It's relatively easy to travel between Wuhan and nearby Huanggang. As a result, Huanggang would become second only to Wuhan among the Chinese cities worst hit by the epidemic. The provinces of Shandong and Hunan were paired with Huanggang. A medical team from Shandong, as soon as it arrived in Huanggang, went straight to the city's main treatment center.
当看见病人情况不好的时候，病人的那种憋气、那种呼吸困难、那种渴望的眼神，那么也激励着我们一定要去救活他。我们当时就有一个信念，我们只有全力以赴。
Somewhere else that was badly hit by the epidemic was Shaogan. Medical teams from Chongqing and Heilongjiang were paired with the city. The doctors and nurses fighting on the front line were supported by hospitals back home, employing teleconsultations to provide patients with personalized treatment plans. The paired support would prove highly effective during the crisis.
一定是支援省的力量很强，省包地市的这个方法，既呢对接了需求，统筹好省里的这个资源，有效的这个支持地市疫情的防控。
Counties, cities, and prefectures also sent their finest medical personnel and resources to Hubei. They included Ningcheng County in Inner Mongolia, Yudu County in Jiangxi, Qindongnan Prefecture in Guizhou, Nanping in Fujian, Hengshen County in Guangxi, and Kashgar in Xinjiang.
请战书我们也签过字了，我早都有心理准备，给家里面人提前也说过，如果要求我去，我会义无反顾的去选择这个。一方有难，八方支援。
Over 42,500 doctors and nurses were mobilized to fight the epidemic. It was the largest deployment of medical personnel since the founding of New China.
我们国家这个制度和体制的优越性，我们是公立医院为主体的这样的一个医疗服务体系。那么在国家面临着这样的一个困难的时刻，他们仍然是义无反顾，而且说义不容辞的来到了一线，叫逆向而行。
At the critical moment in history, when they were most needed, the doctors and nurses from across China stood shoulder to shoulder with their local counterparts. In performing their duty, they demonstrated outstanding medical expertise and mental fortitude.
有一些画面，就是你们摘下这些防护服啊、口罩以后啊，可以说是伤痕累累啊。 勒出来的这个印痕，甚至有的都磨破了，我们看着也很心疼。但是也体现了你们，是最美的天使、光明使者、希望使者。
In the midst of the terrible hardship, the light of life continued to shine. Huang Xiqiu was the chief designer of Xiaotong Shan Hospital, a specialist unit that opened in 2003 to treat SARS patients. On January the 23rd, 2020, the day Wuhan went into lockdown, he took out the blueprint of the old hospital and made a few notes on it.
这两个项目就是同样都是很谨记哈，武汉他们前线那么高级应该毫无保留的嘛，把这个图纸都给他们。我们而且希望他们这个火神山、雷神山能做得比小汤更好。
At 1 p.m. on January the 23rd, Huang received an urgent request for an emergency hospital design. The design team of Xiaotong Shan Hospital reassembled after 17 years. A few adjustments would be needed. Since Huang had already started the process, the revised blueprint could be sent to Wuhan within just 78 minutes. The shore of Jiyin Lake in Wuhan's Caidian district had been chosen as the site for Huashenshun Hospital. Once an area of lotus ponds and low hills, now it would host a brand new 1,000-bed hospital specializing in infectious diseases, to be built in only 10 days. After receiving the blueprint from Huang Xiqiu, 60 designers from the CITIC General Institute of Architectural Design and Research, along with hundreds of architects from across the country, discussed and finalized the design. It took them just 5 hours. However, since it was the day before Lunar New Year's Eve, no construction workers were on hand.
我是大年30的早上就知道这个消息，然后我就主动提前请假，然后我们领导就让我过来了。
It wasn't only doctors and nurses who headed to the epidemic front line. In all, some 123,800 people arrived in Wuhan during the week following the lockdown.
我们这么多设备、这么多人员和材料的组织，我觉得他们都是自己长了腿过来，很多资源调集的速度超出我们自己的想象。
More than 40,000 construction workers were mobilized for the Huashenshun Hospital project. Thousands of items of equipment were also secured. Every machine worked non-stop to complete the work as soon as possible.
如果我们不干，我们自己良心上也说不过去，我们企业干部职工也不会接受，完不成，是要负很大的责任的。
The whole nation watched as the two hospitals were built. Huawei, China Mobile, China Telecom, and China Unicom worked together to achieve local 5G coverage within 36 hours. Qilu Pharmaceutical supplied the 12 exhaust units ordered from it, free of charge. Hubei Aerospace Cable shipped out flame retardant cable overnight. China Midmetals worked to complete the prefabricated steel structures within 24 hours. China Railway Construction disassembled several portable cabins it was using and sent them to the Huashenshun Hospital site. On the 6th day of the Lunar New Year, 3 days before the deadline for Huashenshun Hospital's completion, 600 meters of oxygen piping had yet to be welded. It was one of the most challenging tasks in the whole project. Using conventional welding techniques could create dangerous oxygen leakages.
我们当时给的指导方案的话，就是用熔铅焊，就是相当于用铅料这种特定的金属物质融化之后去填补管道与管道之间的缝隙。会这个技能的人不多，当时我们只有15个工人。
The 15 workers worked non-stop for 3 days and nights to ensure that Huashenshun Hospital was completed on time.
我们跟他讲说，你们必须得回去休息，再不休息就要出人命了。他们坚决不走。
For 10 days and nights, individual projects progressed simultaneously. Everyone was aware that the slightest mistake could result in a serious delay. With patients waiting desperately for beds, no error was permissible.
所有的这些参建人员，在我心目中，他们就是最好的英雄。
In the early days of the epidemic, there had been a severe shortage of medical protective equipment. Wuhan's stopgap strategy meant that sometimes hospitals didn't know if they had enough supplies for the next day. To save protective suits, the medical staff ate as little as possible while working for as long as possible. From late January to February, President Xi repeatedly stressed the need to step up the supply of medical equipment. The Central Steering Group took responsibility for implementing his instructions on the ground. The Joint Epidemic Prevention and Control Mechanism of the State Council worked to coordinate ministries, departments, and localities in mobilizing materials and restarting production after the Spring Festival holiday. From February the 1st to the 7th, the Central Steering Group ordered that 20,000 N95 medical masks be sent to Wuhan every day. At the same time, daily production of the masks nationwide was only 100,000 units. In accordance with a decision by the State Council's Joint Prevention and Control Mechanism, 17 departments and bureaus of the National Development and Reform Commission established a mask team.
全委启动员问题不落地，3个小时司局长层面不能解决的问题，提交给委领导，由委领导出面协调解决。
In early February, the masked team, working from the afternoon to 2 a.m., managed to secure 1,000 N95 medical masks. The team also assumed responsibility for coordinating labor, raw materials, machinery and equipment, capital and transport, and for solving any problems encountered in the resumption and expansion of production at enterprises.
我国拥有相对完整的产业体系，我们在口罩产量大幅增加的同时，口罩生产所需的熔喷布、仿粘布、鼻梁架以及口罩机和口罩机所需要的上万个零部件，同时快速增长，实现了供应。这个全产业链的高效协同的运转。
On January the 25th, daily output of ordinary masks had stood at only 8 million units. Through a concerted effort, production rose steadily. By February the 3rd, daily output in the country's 22 key provinces reached almost 15 million units. And by February the 29th, 116 million units, 15 times greater than a month before. Within a further month, it reached 300 million units.
口罩的快速增长，有力地保障了我们一线医务人员的安全保护，人民群众的身体健康。
Behind this miracle was the strong support provided by China's industrial system, the most comprehensive in the world, one that enables resources to be concentrated on accomplishing major undertakings. On the main battlefield in Wuhan, the daily demand for protective suits was at least 12,500. At the height of the shortage, the entire national stockpile couldn't meet Wuhan's needs for a single day.
现在武汉疫区啊，供需矛盾最突出的还是防护服的问题。那么这个呢，就需求和我们的这个产能呢有很大的矛盾。每天的需求提出来的是10万个，那么我们这个产能每天只有1.3万个。
Wuhan was experiencing the difficulties, but it was up to the whole country to solve them. This factory is owned by Xinxing Cathay International Group. Under the guidance of the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, the enterprise shifted its production to protective suits. The ministry secured the raw materials, and the authorities provided the necessary production technology and quality supervision.
有一次在生产当中，由于当时胶条的供应呢十分紧张，这个即将面临停工的风险，我们呢立即协调，并与胶条企业共同协商，从当天的产量当中调集了部分产品，然后呢由专人打飞的运到了企业。
By March, Xinxing Cathay International's daily production of protective suits had reached 140,000. This represented 40% of total national output. Something else that was desperately needed was negative pressure ambulances. On February the 5th, when Leishunshan Hospital became operational, a large number of patients needed to be transferred there. The Central Steering Group had earlier issued a request for 200 negative pressure ambulances to be delivered to Wuhan within 10 days. In view of the fact that in the whole of 2019, only 50 of the ambulances had been produced in China, the task seemed impossible.
因为整个负压救护车这个产业链呢，涉及到近万个零部件，那个是不可能完成任务的。不党组坚决下决心，要实行斗地采购，要给企业是定心丸。
The Ministry of Industry and Information Technology assigned separate production tasks to a number of key auto manufacturers. The most complex part of the ambulance is the negative pressure isolation cabin. Since there was no existing stock, the ambulance manufacturers dispatched people to wait at the factories and collect the cabins as soon as they were completed.
我们的物流卡车司机蹲守了1天1夜，一直等到凌晨1点多，第一批30个负压设备零件，然后连夜再从山东开到无锡。无锡工厂里面呢，我们的工人也是连夜等在这边，零件一到马上装车。
Dismantling finished vehicles to obtain more chassis, offering high prices for parts, and paying suppliers in advance. These were some of the ways employed by the auto manufacturers to obtain what they needed. Although the ambulances were manufactured on time, heavy snowfall in northern China threatened to delay delivery.
湖北、辽宁、河北、天津、河南、湖南这5省1市的交警在风雪中接力。 交警一路护送到了湖北。
A total of nearly 700 negative pressure ambulances were eventually delivered to Hubei. As a result, all the people who needed it could be safely transferred to hospital.
如果没有各地的协同、央企的协同，没有整个的集中力量办大事这个体制优势是不可能实现的。
The cost of treating the coronavirus patients was borne entirely by the state. As of May the 31st, the government had provided financial support for over 58,000 patients admitted to hospital. The total cost of their treatment was 1.35 billion yuan, around 23,000 yuan per capita. In the case of severely ill patients, the average cost exceeded 150,000 yuan, with some critical cases costing hundreds of thousands.
我们这次这个覆盖面之广，保障力度之大，应该说是前所未有的，实施了先救治、后结算的政策。患者的费用呢，由医保和财政共同负担。
In response to the state's efforts to help those in need, the population at large rallied round in support. The temporary treatment centers provided meals for patients. However, At one of them, an old lady stubbornly ate only leftovers, no matter what the medical staff did to persuade her to eat the food specially prepared for her.
奶奶，你为什么每天吃剩饭呀？我想问问你。
你说是这不偷钱呐，这是国家的钱，你叫我都给他倒了，我舍不得倒，这饭都倒了不浪费吗？
就劝奶奶，国家希望您能早日健康，希望您每天都能吃新鲜的饭。奶奶也答应了您。
As of May the 31st, a total of 162.4 billion yuan had been allocated for epidemic prevention and control work at all levels of government. This was enough to achieve the basic goal of not delaying medical treatment. At no time did the epidemic prevention and control work suffer because of funding problems. The fish are nearly half the size of a man and weigh over 15 kilos each. At the Taiping Lake Freshwater Fish Farm in Huangshan, 27 workers busied themselves early in the morning, hauling in the nets and landing the fish. Today, they plan to fill 7 large boxes with 15,000 kilograms of fresh fish and send them to Wuhan.
这批鱼在太平湖镇生产有10年了，个头大，鱼的肉质特别好。
This inter-provincial fish delivery operation stemmed from news announced 4 days previously. On March the 10th, President Xi had said, Wuhan people like to eat fresh fish, so more supplies should be organized when conditions permit. Xu Tongyu was surprised that the president had concerned himself with such a small detail. He decided to make a contribution in the form of fish to the people of Wuhan, since they had been quarantined for so long for the sake of the nation. Truckloads of fish arrived in Wuhan from Xianning, Jingzhou, and the local lakes. They were shipped directly to communities, where community staff and volunteers delivered them to residents' homes.
现在是天天都在买鱼吗？还是今天是第一次？
买了有很多回了啊。
还方便吗买？
方便，现在方便多了。
A huge city of more than 9 million people had been in lockdown for 76 days. In all this time, President Xi had been concerned about ensuring the basic operation of Wuhan and safeguarding the livelihood of its citizens. He repeatedly addressed the issue at high-level government meetings. Wuhan consumes 5,400 tons of grain, 4,000 tons of vegetables, and 1,200 tons of meat every day. How could such a huge supply be guaranteed? On January the 23rd, after Wuhan went into lockdown, the government enacted an emergency price monitoring mechanism for household goods. 2 days later, it showed that the price of leafy vegetables in Wuhan had risen sharply, and that stocks had fallen below what was sufficient to meet 3 days' demand. The National Development and Reform Commission responded immediately by coordinating the emergency shipment of 350 tons of vegetables from Shouguang, Shandong Province.
又推动了这个两边的签订协议，然后呢，保证每天的供应量。这个供应呢，也是根据两边的企业协商，他们需要什么菜、什么样的价格，在满足市场的供应。
A mechanism involving 9 provinces ensured that over 71,000 tons of essential goods were transferred to Hubei province.
保障湖北武汉生活必需品的供应，是疫情防控的后勤保障，发挥政府的作用，组织调运物资，做到不脱销、不担当。
From meat, eggs, and vegetables to water, electricity, and gas, supplies of everything had to be maintained. The Changjiang Water Resources Commission stepped up the efforts at the Three Gorges Dam to replenish the water in the middle and lower reaches of the Yangtze River. in order to ensure that demand for water was met in Wuhan and Hubei. The average flow at Yichang in January was nearly 70% above what it had been in previous years. Hanchuan Power Company has 6 sets of generators, 2 for Shaogan and 4 for Wuhan. During the fight against the epidemic, the State Grid Corporation made detailed plans for supplying the company with coal so that it could continue generating electricity.
电力系统是靠输电线路和发电厂用户连在一起的一个整体。如果没有上一级电网的安全运行，你像湖北和武汉的这个电力供应是没有办法保障的。看到这个城市的灯光还是亮的，我们觉得这个就是光明，这个就是希望，这个就是温暖，这个就是信心。
During the epidemic, Wuhan managed to maintain normal supplies of electricity, gas, water, and fuel, and to keep its communication systems functioning. During the lockdown, since everyone stayed at home, the volume of goods delivered increased significantly. 29-year-old Zheng Hong is the director of the Runhe branch of JD Logistics in Wuhan. Throughout the crisis, she and her colleagues stuck to their posts.
疫情期间，我们要比平时配送的速度更快，服务态度要更好。只有这样，老百姓才能够更早地拿到他们急需的物资，也能够缓解他们在家中焦虑的心情。
To get through the last mile of urban transport, on February the 2nd, troops in Hubei set up an anti-epidemic transport system. 130 military vehicles were deployed to cover the 13 districts of Wuhan, a total area of over 8,000 square kilometers. From January 27th to May 8th, over 1.5 million tons of epidemic prevention equipment and household goods and almost 3 million tons of coal, fuel, and other production materials were transported to Hubei by rail, road, water, and air. Railway workers, making the most of the network's unified management, interconnection, and fast and convenient high-speed service, strove to transport personnel and materials to Hubei as quickly as possible.
坚持一事一处理的原则，统筹调动各种运输方式，确保这些重要应急物资能够顺利到达湖北武汉。
The civil aviation sector also played its part. A total of 394 special charter flights transported medical personnel swiftly to Wuhan and brought them home safely. In Hekou, Yunnan Province, 93 villagers on motorcycles carried 22 tons of bananas down the mountains and sent them to Hubei. In Shannan, Tibet, people prepared 2,000 tons of mineral water and 70 tons of pork and yak meat. Hubei Province has been supporting Shannan for 26 years. Now, even though they are thousands of kilometers apart, the people of Shannan insisted on demonstrating their goodwill. Cauliflowers from Qinghai, nuts from Xinjiang, potatoes from Ningxia, Gansu, and Inner Mongolia, cabbages from Liaoning and Hebei, rape from Sichuan and Jiangsu, eggs from Zhejiang and Guizhou, oranges from Chongqing, Jiangxi, and Hunan, apples from Shanxi, rice from Heilongjiang and Jilin, flour from Shanxi and Henan, eggplants from Guangxi, frozen seafood from Fujian, and fresh fruits from Hainan. All over the country, people wanted to send their best local produce to Hubei to show their support. During the 76 days of lockdown, the warm expressions of love never stopped. Behind Wuhan and Hubei stood the whole of China.
"现在呢还不能跟你说话，但是呢，等到有机会的时候呢，一定要你听一听妈妈的声音。"
Before the baby was born, both parents were diagnosed with novel coronavirus. Immediately after being delivered, he had to be temporarily separated from them. CCTV News set up a live stream. On February the 16th, he was given his name, Shiliu, meaning pomegranate. On February the 17th, his father met his 14-day-old child for the first time. His parents in the cloud, who had been watching over him, all sent him their love.
小宝宝呢是在正月初16点钟，那谐音呢就是16。第二呢是我们在当前这种情况下呢，希望全国的人民像石榴籽一样紧紧地团结在一起，那共同的战胜疫情。
From supervisors in the cloud to nannies in the cloud, compared with the fight against SARS 17 years before, a major difference was that, in the era of mobile internet and social media, everyone could be a commentator and reporter. At a meeting of the Politburo Standing Committee on January the 25th, Xi Jinping had demanded the prompt release of accurate information on the epidemic. On February the 23rd, an online conference was held, attended by 170,000 participants. President Xi spoke about advancing the work of coordinating the prevention and control of COVID-19 with economic and social development. The full text of his speech was published that evening. During the war on the epidemic, from the central to the local level, press conferences became daily occurrences. By providing timely, accurate, open, and transparent information, they established a bridge between the government and people. As of April the 30th, the State Council's Information Office had held 45 press briefings and meetings, while its Epidemic Prevention and Control Mechanism had hosted 95 regular daily briefings. Press conferences were also organized in Wuhan itself.
把中央的对湖北的、对武汉的重要的一些政策进行一个一线的解读，把最新的、最前沿的相关的情况呢，精准的给全国、全世界关于这个事件的全景的发布。
从什么时候开始接诊？
收治这部分武汉市最严重的新冠肺炎中药房。我们可以看。
More than 400 journalists from across China volunteered to go to Wuhan to work side by side with the local media. They conducted thousands of interviews in the red zones, produced a vast quantity of articles, and reported people's concerns. The Chinese media conveyed the story of China's fight against the epidemic to the world's public. The tales of how people heroically withstood the hardship and danger will be remembered by history. On January the 26th, the second day of the Lunar New Year, Yuan Chuanwei received a call from his business partner in Wuxi, telling him that Huashanshan Hospital was in urgent need of hydrogen peroxide disinfectors. The partner wanted him to resume work as soon as possible and make 1,000 sets of parts before February 12th for dispatch to Wuxi.
打电话给工人的，但是他们那时候已经村上就已经不允许出来了。从编程啊、刀具啊、从加工调试啊，我都会弄。辛苦总比疫情夺去人的生命要好对吧？所以先顶着吧。
Yuan Chuanwei promised to rush out 200 sets of equipment in 16 days, a job that would usually require at least 5 workers, but he managed it. During the war on the epidemic, countless small and medium-sized enterprises silently made their contribution by donating money and materials, rushing out anti-epidemic supplies, and participating in construction. In the time of crisis, small enterprises shouldered big responsibilities. Meanwhile, central enterprises in fields including energy, aviation, grain and oil, and communications gave full play to their role as key national assets. Air China, China Eastern Airlines, China Southern Airlines, and others did all they could to ensure uninterrupted flights. CNPC, Sinopec, COFCO, and Sinopharm also ensured that supplies reached where they were needed. In the construction of Huashanshan and Leishanshan hospitals, in the campaign to solve the shortage of key medical resources, in the supply of daily necessities, and in the orderly resumption of work and production, state-owned enterprises never backed down and never failed the people. Private enterprises also came to the fore. 200 Huawei employees went to Huashanshan and Leishanshan hospitals to build a 5G network. Tencent launched a 1.5 billion yuan anti-epidemic fund. On the first day of the Lunar New Year, Alibaba announced that it would donate 1 billion yuan to purchase medical supplies. Large donations of money and materials to support Hubei were made also by compatriots from Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, and by Chinese students overseas. As of April the 23rd, charitable organizations and the Red Cross had received donations of almost 42 billion yuan. Trickling streams converged to form rivers. By fighting as one, China could defeat the virus. A billion people standing shoulder to shoulder can create an impregnable Great Wall.
这次新冠肺炎疫情防控工作取得的成效，再次彰显了中国共产党领导和中国特色社会主义制度的显著优势。
Every inch of land witnessed the great battle, and history has recorded everyone who participated in it. The strength of the people's unity and the advantages of the socialist system have been perfectly demonstrated in the magnificent fight against the epidemic. Victory is assured when people stand together.
重小寒。 鲜。